opinion, what do you think the bottleneck is? Why do you think people at the last 20 years have been so resistant to maybe conversations about peaking ages and long-term development and strength conditioning being used, or nutritionists or stuff like that? What do you think the main barrier to real change is? Because I feel like everyone's just spinning their wheels right now and they want to change, but no one, everyone's like real gun shy.
I don't know. I think if we knew the answer to that, we'd be able to fix this problem, right?
Yeah. But you made one of them, which is people's mindset shifting. That's definitely a big one.
Yeah, and I think just there's just been a long cycle of like this old school philosophy in gymnastics of just like, numbers, volume. Like the more we do things over and over again, the more likely we are to be able to, get that skill or improve that skill or improve that strength. But I don't know. I don't really think that's really working. I think that's why athletes break down, is from just doing the same thing over and over again, instead of like, okay, what can we do differently to improve this problem? I just think it's maybe some younger coaches coming up now, like athletes. I mean, like Jordan Weber comes to mind, like seeing Kyla Ross coaching at UCLA now, like these kids that kind of went through the system and were very successful athletes, but didn't have maybe the best, I don't know what phrase to use, but
experience.
Yeah, exactly. Them being open to now including, work with nutritionists and sports psychologists and strength and conditioning coaches. Like maybe this younger group of coaches that's coming up now is going to help evolve the system. Education being too much jargon or too like high term, and simplifying it. Like medical doctors are just like, they're just going to give a diagnosis and you have this and you have that. And, a kid goes to a doctor and they come back with, let's say what you're saying earlier, an OCD lesion of the elbow. The gymnastics coach is like, what in the hell am I supposed to do with that? Yeah. So then like our position is kind of has to be that education of the in-between of like the basic, simple description of what that means and then what we can do about it.
Yeah.
Whereas like this diagnosis is like, oh my God, it's like end of the world. Like, oh, they can't do this, they can't do that. They're not allowed to be in the gym. And we have to be like, hold on a second. They can be in the gym, but they can't do A, B, and C, but they can do X, Y, and Z.
Right.
And so I think we're in our positions, like we are the most important, like we're the bridge. We need to be the educators, because the education is not going to come from the medical doctors, because they don't understand what these kids are doing on a day in and day out basis. Now there are some, and I've got a great relationship with some out here in California, and thank God for those couple physicians. Because they do understand gymnastics. And so maybe not entirely, but at least on a decent level. And so then it makes the communication a lot simpler. But, overall, we are like, we're the bridge. We have to be the educators and the communicators. One point you touched on, I think gets forgotten about too much is what does the athlete think? What is the athlete feeling? And how, like, better communication with the individual athletes of like, what can we do to help improve their problem? Because I think a lot of times, and I've kind of learned this from the male gymnasts recently, but in the female sport, they're just, first of all, they're so much younger, and they're just like told what to do, like every single step of the way, where like, I don't necessarily want to tell a kid what to do. I want to like work with that athlete and help them improve to what their goal is.
Sure.
And then I touched on the male athlete because I've had a good handful of male gymnasts recently, and it's just such a different ballgame. Like first of all, I don't understand. I don't want to say I don't understand. Men's gymnastics is so insane and so intense.
You have to be, yeah.
Yeah. But I have one athlete right now that he's a ring specialist, college gymnast, and he teaches me so much because we'll talk through certain movements and I'll kind of watch him and he'll be like, it really hurts in this position. And then I'll think about what muscles are that, how can we activate that outside of that pain-free range so that you can get stronger, so you can go back and do that skill on rings. Because like, I can watch rings, but like, the amount of strength it takes, like, Dave, like it's just ridiculous.
Yeah.
But my point is, like, I literally talk through things with him. I learn things from him so that I can help him.
Sure.
Because I don't know the exact, like, skills and, like, how you get into those positions and all these things, but we can, like, dial it in, slow it down. We can do things in my gym, and then I can create, like, a rehab program. He comes to see me once a week. We create the program. He goes back, does it at his gym on his own, and then he comes back next week.
Problem. But in your experience, in your kind of clinic, what are you seeing? What is useful? What are the things that you think are like elephants in the room that the culture is not talking about as to the real reasons these injuries are occurring? And speak generally, we don't want to put you in a box, but I don't know. What are your thoughts? Because I have some thoughts.
Yeah, I would say, the list of injuries, the biggest ones I see are the growth plate related injuries. Of course, the Severs, the Osgood-Slaughters, wrists and elbows, of course. I would say the biggest the biggest injury I see for sure, hands down, is low back pain. The spondylolisthesis, the spondylolysis, just, extension dysfunction. And I think the biggest problem with that is that the underlying deep core stability is not addressed. We, as physical therapists, I think obviously that's our area of expertise, but I think from a general gymnastics conditioning program, I think that's really missed. I think big picture, they're like, oh yeah, we need to strengthen the core, but like the fundamental, like, breathing problems, rib cage position, like being able to get the breath down into the belly and then stabilizing there. If it's really hard to teach like 6-year-old kids how to do that, but teaching like 12, 13, 14-year-old kids how to do that and what that means, and that then maintaining that body position and that stability through all their different movements, instead of just like going into back extension and just hinging off their facet joints. They actually know how to create stability. Do they have proper thoracic extension, or are they all just like, throwing it into their lumbar spine? I think that's a huge component of a missing link.
More lately, I see a lot of people who have progressed. Honestly, it's workload based issues. They have fatigue fractures that are starting, but then like one thing really puts them over the edge. And usually it's like a 1.5 layout or something like that. And it's when you think about like every injury is an equation of force overload and force capacity, right? So you think about if you've only been doing your entire life body weight plyometrics and body weight strength training and body weight stuff, it doesn't matter how many leg lifts you do. The force of the compression on your spine on floor is significantly higher than your body can take. It doesn't matter how tight you are. You could have the tightest, most rigid, technically sound gymnast in the entire world. But if they are doing skills that are 10 times their body weight, which is recorded on floor, eventually you're going to hit a rate limiting factor of when you hit the floor and you buckle somewhere because you're not strong enough. That's why like loaded carries and farmer carries are so helpful, because they teach that dynamic stabilization and the ability to breathe and brace and get like full depth control under loading. And so like that's a problem that I see, and like almost a no-brainer for me. Like, why don't you see that this could be so beneficial? If punching ability is so important to you, yes, train it technically and learn about stiffness and stuff, but like, why wouldn't you do strength conditioning that is just loaded walking? It's just like resist walking, right? Like that makes a no-brainer sense for me. So, but instead, I don't know whether it's culture, whether it's folklore, but it's like, no, more box jumps, more leg lifts. Your core's not strong enough, more V-ups, more hollow rocks. Like that is a gymnastics specific shape that is not going to tolerate anti-compression forces. So that's personally what I see is like that. But that goes to the bigger conversation of like, back to why strength and conditioning can be so valuable for so many of these injuries. Like we know from significant IOC published papers and other stuff that strength training is beneficial for youth athletes, especially when they're growing, because they can't tolerate training load. Like you can make that argument with elbows and OCD being force overload and reps of round offs and high volume, but also not being strong enough. You can make that for compression based back pain. You can make that for Osgood-Slaughters Severus. It's just like, you're not strong enough and you're doing too much. Slow down, get strong, and get really good technically, and then get through puberty in one piece.
When people ask, and even Jessica asked me this, like, is strength training bad for young athletes? And I was like, absolutely not. Like, obviously I'm going to be biased, but think of like this box jump activity. And I use box jumps in different forms. So I'm not anti box jump by any means, but that athlete, the force that they're putting into the ground and then exploding back up onto this box, you're adding their body weight, you're adding gravity into that factor. So you mean to tell me that they can do that 300 times during a week, but then they can't do a hex bar deadlift with that's like 85 pounds where they're actually stabilizing their spine, bracing their spine, picking something up off the ground? Like, it doesn't make sense. And in the same, just even thinking about like back handspring, like the amount of force that's going through the shoulders and the spine in that movement, in extension, but then you can't put a barbell either in a front rack position or back rack position on them and have them, again, stabilize their spine in a controlled environment and learn that movement pattern, first of all, but then being able to do it under load, that's not going to help actually stabilize their spine over time and be able to manage and undertake that load. That's just ridiculous to me. But to your point, it's the old school philosophy of like, oh, we just have to do these gymnastic specific skills only. Well, hold on. These weighted skills are actually going to help these gymnastics skills.
Yeah.
Because they're under like a more controlled environment. And then you're specifically strengthening certain movement patterns that are also forgotten about in gymnastics, which if you don't address them leads to more compensation patterns and more limitations and more issues.
Actually, you brought up one thing that I think this year is maybe going to change people's mindset a little bit is having some sort of off season. I mean, there's no off season in gymnastics. That's another thing that's a little bit crazy to me. Like looking at all these other sports across the world, they all have an off season, but gymnastics doesn't have an off season. I mean, in theory, they say like, oh, after the national championships is off season or after the state meet is off season, depending on the level of the kids. But
it's not an off season.
No, that's exactly what I'm saying. It's just like, and so I don't know, it'll be interesting to see. It's hard because of, different countries had different levels of shutdowns this year where kids couldn't train. They couldn't be in the gym. Some kids didn't train. Some kids couldn't be in the gym. Some kids, especially in the US, right? Because the different states had different rules all over the map. Some kids trained through it. Some kids, who knows what was going on different levels because it depended on where you live. But I would be very interested to see, and I don't think this is something we can actually research. I don't know how we would do that, but kids that actually took maybe a month off because they were forced to in 2020, because they couldn't get in their gym and train, how much better are their bodies feeling because they had that time off? And I know there's something to be said about the repetition of gymnastics and this and that, blah, 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 like compared to other sports. But is a month time, like literally downtime, that much of a detriment? No, actually, I think it's a benefit.
I do too.
Yeah.